Welcome to Faith and Freedom 250. Today, we're looking at a truth America's founders understood well. Freedom cannot stand without faith, and faith cannot flourish without education. They believed virtue, not just knowledge, was the real foundation of liberty. Let's walk us through the lessons left for us by the founding fathers.
America's founders knew something we've drifted from today. Education isn't just preparation for a career, it's preparation for character. They believed that free people needed more than information. They needed hearts trained to know right from wrong. Knowledge without virtue could be misused, and virtue without knowledge wouldn't endure. Education in their eyes was a sacred duty rooted in moral truth and civic responsibility.
The founders inherited this understanding from both scripture and history. They had studied the rise and fall of ancient republics and saw how ignorance and corruption destroyed liberty. And they read Proverbs. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. To them, knowledge began with reverence for God. They understood that education's highest aim was not only to produce skillful workers, but wise citizens who could discern right from wrong and govern themselves accordingly.
This conviction shaped the way they spoke about education. John Adams, writing to his cousin Zabdiel Adams in 1776, warned that liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people. Thomas Jefferson, though often described as a champion of reason, insisted that morality was essential for Republican government, declaring that no nation has ever yet existed or been governed without religion. And in his farewell address, George Washington spoke plainly. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. To them, these were not platitudes, but principles.
The founders saw faith as a foundation of freedom. Faith shaped conscience, and conscience guided behavior. Education, then, was the means by which both faith and freedom could flourish together, instructing the young not only in letters and numbers, but in character and virtue. Schools were to nurture the mind and the soul. The founders understood that republics are sustained not by armies and laws alone, but by the citizens who understand their rights and exercise them with righteousness.
Early American education reflected this. From the New England Primer to the McGuffey Readers, faith was woven into the fabric of learning. Children read scripture to learn their letters and absorbed lessons in humility, honesty, and gratitude. The goal was not simply to train the intellect, but to shape the heart. Knowledge was to be coupled with duty and learning with love of God and neighbor. Education was understood as a partnership between parents, church, and community, all working together to prepare each generation for both earthly citizenship and eternal destiny.
Early legislation, even before the Constitution was ratified, reflected the union of faith, education, and freedom. One of the most important legislative acts of the 18th century to link education with virtue and faith was the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Passed by the Confederation Congress and reaffirmed under the Constitution, it set the pattern for settling new territories and made clear that education was a moral and civic necessity, not merely an intellectual pursuit. The ordinance famously declared, "Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged." In a single sentence, Congress affirmed what generations of Americans had believed, that liberty cannot endure without virtue, and virtue cannot flourish without faith. For the founders, schools were to be nurseries of character as much as centers of learning.
Just 2 years earlier, the Land Ordinance of 1785 set aside the 16th section of every township for public schools. While practical, it reflected a deeper belief. The survival of the Republic depended on an educated and virtuous people. These laws didn't separate knowledge from morality. They envisioned education guided by divine truth, forming men and women fit for liberty.
State constitutions carried this conviction forward. The Massachusetts Constitution of 1780, written largely by John Adams, called for the diffusion of knowledge as well as virtue among the people, insisting this was necessary to preserve the rights and liberties. Adams and his contemporaries viewed schools as instruments of self-government. Only a morally educated citizen could sustain freedom. Similarly, the Pennsylvania's 1776 Constitution urged that schools be established in every county to instruct youth in useful learning, but also in virtues and good manners. Education, in their view, was not morally neutral. It was a sacred trust intended to form responsible citizens who could govern themselves under God.
Observers from abroad noticed this too. When Alexis de Tocqueville visited in the 1830s, he famously noted that religion was the first of their political institutions. He saw how Christian morality tempered American freedom with virtue. In a land without kings or aristocrats, Americans looked to their faith and their schools to form the kind of people who could govern themselves. The founders' experiment in self-government depended on this equilibrium.
Yet, as centuries passed, that balance began to erode. The pursuit of knowledge gradually became separated from the pursuit of wisdom. In the 20th century, education became increasingly focused on technical skill and personal ambition, while moral formation faded away. The removal of prayer and scripture from public schools symbolized a broader shift from a God-centered view of man to a man-centered view of God. The founders' conviction that freedom requires faith was overshadowed by the notion that liberty could stand alone.
The result has been a generation adrift, well-informed perhaps, but often uncertain of truth and purpose. When morality is divorced from learning, education loses its soul. When virtue is no longer taught, freedom becomes fragile. The founders would remind us that liberty is not self-sustaining. It must be cultivated in every heart through disciplined habits of faith and reason.
The founders entrusted freedom to a people who would understand its cost and purpose. They knew liberty, unguided by virtue, would decay into license, and knowledge without reverence produces pride. They called upon every generation to renew the covenant between God, freedom, and learning, a covenant that sustains both the nation and the soul.
To preserve the republic they built, we must return to the principles that gave it life. Families, churches, and Christian schools must take up the duty of teaching truth, not just facts, but faith, not just skills, but virtue. For as the founders knew, only an educated and godly people can remain truly free.
If we want to remain a free people, we must teach our children not only how to make a living, but how to live rightly. True education begins with faith, grows through knowledge, and bears the fruit of freedom.
America's founders built a nation on the belief that faith forms virtue, virtue sustains freedom, and education binds them together. To keep the blessings they passed down, we must return to those truths. Thanks for joining us on Faith and Freedom 250. We'll see you next time.